I can't believe it. A Space Marine 2 developer just stepped forward and just gave away the secret on how to make a successful game. Get this. They said, just make a good game. You know, with as many failures that we've seen in AAA, I'm surprised that none of these companies haven't just folded. Begged for mercy. Gamers! Gamers! I'm so sorry. We need your money. We're going broke. We're going to go back to doing what we were supposed to be doing in the first place. We've seen colossal failures to epic proportions, likely to the tune of billions of dollars wasted over just the last couple of years, and this year's not even done yet. Looking at you, Dragon Age. It's such a good time to be a gamer. The best games are succeeding. The worst games, the soulless attempts at stealing our money, are falling flat on their face. Developers are out there pushing back against societal pressures and just focusing on making great games because that's what matters to players. But there are those that are out there that just don't understand what's going on. They don't see the differences between games that succeed and games that fail. They don't understand what it takes to make a successful game. But lucky for them, Space Marine 2 developer has stepped forward to shed some light. But before that, today's sponsor. New World Eternum just launched on consoles and it's already making waves. It's available now on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC. If you love action RPGs, then this is something that you're not going to want to miss. Set on the island of Eternum, this world is filled with mystery, danger, and endless adventure. You'll forge your destiny through skill-based, real-time combat with a blend of swords, guns, and even sorcery. Whether you're exploring solo or teaming up with friends, it's your choice to how you want to play. Without a strict class system that's weighing you down, you can fully customize your characters and play how you want. It's all about how you equip and upgrade your gear, allowing for endless possibilities to shape your own playstyle. And the world of Eternum is massive. There is so much to explore, from the stunning landscapes to the various quests that are going to keep you hooked for hours. Best part, crossplay means that you can join forces with your friends no matter where they're playing, PC or console. And if you're into PvE or PvP, New World Eternum has your back. So what are you waiting for? New World Eternum is available now. Go grab it on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, or PC and dive into the adventure. It's been a rocky couple years for the AAA industry. Ubisoft has completely collapsed upon themselves, unable to turn a profit since Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Xbox's Redfall failed and Starfield didn't connect with their audience. Sony stumbled all over themselves with Helldivers and brought us some of the best months of memes with Concord. But I want to make something clear. There will always be games that fail. Market conditions change, players' tastes change, trends die out. There are a lot of reasons outside of a game being categorically bad that can cause it to fail, and while those outside factors may be the case with some games, I don't think it's the case for many of the games that we've been seeing today. Recently, in an article written by Wesley Yin Poole of IGN titled Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 Dev says big budget games are failing in part because teams are overscoping their projects. Great games do well. Wesley spoke with Saber Interactive Chief Creative Officer Tim Willits about the issues that the game industry is facing today and the success of Space Marine 2. Wesley writes, Concord, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, Star Wars Outlaws, Final Fantasy XVI. The list of big budget video game failures is growing longer each month, with AAA publishers struggling to make a dent in the dominance of older, more established players in this most brutal of markets. Throughout it all, massive hits have come out of nowhere. One of those is Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, developed by World War Z and SnowRunner studio Saber Interactive and published by Focus Entertainment. Of course, Space Marine 2 benefited from the strength of the Warhammer 40k brand, which has been carefully managed by Games Workshop and is about as big as it's ever been. But still, Space Marine 2's breakout success came as a surprise even to its developer, as Saber Chief Creative Officer Tim Willits told IGN in a recent interview. As the video game industry comes to terms with high-profile failures of the likes of Concord and Suicide Squad, what enabled Space Marine 2 to succeed? Both Concord and Suicide Squad took years to develop at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars, and launched into genres some say gamers had long since moved on from. It is Saber's biggest ever video game undertaking and took 4 years to develop, a significant cycle as far as AAA production goes, although, as we've seen with Concord and Suicide Squad, hardly an outlier. Indeed, we've seen huge hits from video games that have had similar long developments. Arrowhead's Helldivers 2, the fastest-selling PlayStation Studios game of all time, took just shy of 8 years to develop and at significant expense. It is an oversimplification to say that Concord and Suicide Squad's long developments were the root cause of their failure, although they clearly played a big part. I'm going to stop you right there. One of the biggest issues that the games industry is facing today is the fact that they are listening to journalists and analysts rather than the players. And these people are telling them what they want to hear, and that's why they keep making the same mistake over and over again. You're bringing up Final Fantasy XVI in the same conversation as Star Wars Outlaws, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, and Concord? Are you out of your mind? That game sold 3 million copies in its first year, and while it didn't meet Square Enix's financial target, you're not talking about the fact that those targets were put in place because they were trying to make up for the losses that they incurred on Foam Stars and Forspoken. I feel like they just say things to say things. Saying that Space Marine 2 was successful because of Warhammer, the vast majority of people that bought that game had no background with Warhammer before. They said the same thing about Baldur's Gate 3 because we all know how much everybody loves Wizards of the Coast. Come on. And what is with this idea that the more money that's spent on a game and the longer its development is going to have any impact on how the market receives a game? With Concord, if they developed that game for 2 years or 20 or spent $10 or $10 billion, it wouldn't have mattered. Like Outlaws, like Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, it was a bad game, nobody wanted to play it, and nobody was ever interested in it. Saying that it has something to do with players moving away from a genre. Well, if that was the case, then why did Concord fail and Deadlock succeed? I'd like to know. I just don't understand why game developers and games journalists don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. They see the culprit. It's like a Scooby-Doo episode. They just feign ignorance over it. You're making games that players don't want. You're targeting audiences with a minuscule demographic of people that are actually active out there buying games in the first place. You're targeting that audience. You're targeting audiences that don't even play video games to begin with. And while I applaud you for wanting to be inclusive, you're selling skis in the desert. What do you expect to happen? And the best part is, they're spending a lot of money doing it. Wesley continues with, this week, Epic Games boss Tim Sweeney said that the games industry is going through what he called a generational change that has led to some games failing to sell as well as the publishers had hoped. One of the manifestations of that change we're seeing right now is that a lot of games are released with high budgets and they're not selling as well as expected, Sweeney said, whereas other games are going incredibly strong. What we're seeing is a real trend towards players gravitating towards big games where they can play more with their friends. That reads as an ill-advised dig against single-player games, or at least their sustainability as AAA projects. Yes, Space Marine 2 and Helldivers 2 are boosted by their co-op play, but single-player games continue to sell record numbers. Just look at From Software's Elden Ring and Game Science's Black Myth Wukong, both predominantly single-player games. Willits has his own theory on what's happening. Speaking to IGN, Willits said that the problem isn't necessarily that AAA games take too long to develop and thus launch into already abandoned genres. Rather, Willits believes AAA developers are trending to overscope their games, which in turn means they fail to do any one thing brilliantly. For Space Marine 2, Willits explained Saber made sure to nail the core combat and kept a handle on the scope of the game. So much so that some have praised it for rekindling memories of the Xbox 360 era of action games. It's not necessarily that the genre has moved on, because great games will always do well, Willits said. One of the things that we try to do at Saber, and this is part of my job as creative officer of all teams, we have a core belief that what you do every second and what happens when you push these buttons and that core gameplay loop is so critical. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction in the gameplay and the feeling you have. And then we adhere to our core pillars, like be the ultimate Space Marine, melee, ranged, swarms, that's it. And a lot of teams throughout development will overscope their games. They look at other games that just came out and say, oh, we got to do that. Let's add this. We got to do this. And they lose focus on that core, what actually makes the game fun. We're not in Space Marine 2 doing things like that. Well, the swarms are new technology, but there isn't some revolutionary gameplay mechanic no one's ever seen before. There are gameplay mechanics that people are familiar with, but we do it really, really well. And we execute really, really well. Man, I love that he brings up scope creep, because I think it's one of the more observable truths that we have when we look at the collapse of Ubisoft. Year over year, as they've continued to release the exact same titles, they have continued to pollute the core experience of why players were playing those games in the first place. Look at Ghost Recon, as an example, a game that started out as a third-person competitive shooter with a campaign, would eventually suffer from constant shifts in approach and gameplay, before vaulting the competitive shooter portion of the franchise entirely after their attempt to make a pay-to-win, free-to-play Ghost Recon Phantoms, and ultimately turn it into an open-world pseudo-looter shooter. Assassin's Creed has gone through the exact same issues, losing its identity, gaining RPG mechanics, and turning more of it into an action game than a stealth game. What's happening to these studios is a textbook case of identity lost, caused by chasing trends instead of refining the things that made their games great in the first place, or, in the case of some of their new IPs, copying their competition without finding their own identity. Space Marine 2 succeeded because it was a great game sold at a fair price. It's as simple as that. It reminded players of the Xbox 360 era of action games because it was just a fun game. It had tight controls, the narrative was compelling, the characters were compelling, the action on screen, these moments of spectacle. It was just a fun and wild ride, and you didn't feel like you needed to be married to it. It didn't feel like the game needed to try to do too much. They didn't pad out the game time by putting in collectibles and other side quests and things like that, from keeping you from progressing and making sure you're putting in as many hours as you possibly can into the game. It didn't pop up immediately with a battle pass menu the minute that you started the game up. It's not doing these things that players don't want in games. That's the reason why the game is successful. It's just a damn good video game, and that's it. Players loved it because it's a memory of what the industry used to be, back when they used to appreciate the players and when the players used to appreciate the games that were being made for them. Games that were out there that were respecting our time, respecting our money, and more than anything, trying to actually earn that money. And Space Marine 2 is one of those games that earns your money. This idea that you need to read tea leaves about why games are successful, how these games are successful. I think one of the reasons why players are so upset today, why you're seeing so much vitriol in the games industry, is because players are frustrated that we're seeing so many of these games that are more or less these patronized versions of what C-suite executives believe our tastes are. This is what they think of us. That's what they're putting out there, and it's offensive. The KOTOR remake is in incredible hands. Saber gets it. I'm so happy to read this. I'm so happy I played their last game. I know a lot of people are really worried about the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake, but man, I'm all on board, baby. I'm all on board. I'm not going to pre-order it, but you know, I think you're going to do a good job. It has nothing to do with how many people are working on a game. It doesn't matter what genre it's in. It doesn't matter about anything else other than, does the game respect my time and money? Does it earn my money? Is it fun to play? And that's why Space Marine 2 succeeded. Helldivers 2 proved that you could make a game and reach wide audiences with a horde shooter. Baldur's Gate 3 broke records, a lot of records, as a turn-based game. And there are a ton of other examples that are out there that are just like that, proving a lot of the industry wrong and showing that they don't understand what we actually want. The article continues with, then there's the question of development cost, which pretty much every AAA publisher has said risen sharply once again with the launch of the latest generation of consoles. Development costs, Willits said, have gotten so out of control that some AAA games, especially those in the US states such as California, now have unreasonable sales expectations set against their budgets. Saber, Willits insisted, developed Space Marine 2 affordably, with a budget less than half of Doom Eternal, the last game Willits worked on while boss of id Software before leaving to join Saber in 2019. We don't need to sell 4 million units to make Space Marine 2 a success, Willits said. There are many games, sadly, especially out of North American developers, where if you do not sell 5 million copies, you're a failure. I mean, what business are we in where you fail if you sell less than 5 million? There are examples like that, and we don't want to be that business. We want to be the developer that focuses on the core experience, what makes games actually fun, and do it really well and make it affordably. Look at SnowRunner, dude. SnowRunner is literally driving trucks through mud. That's it. I'm done. I just described the game. 15 million people played it because the experience was perfect. Look at World War Z. Like, come on. We're not going to get an Academy Award for the game, but 25 million people have played it because it's just this perfectness. And that's what we do well. Even with Willits' overscoped argument, there are exceptions to the rule. Consider Baldur's Gate 3, which, including its successful early access period, was in the works for around 6 years before its record-breaking launch in 2023. Predominantly single player and with a Rockstar-level nonsense for scope, as one developer put it. What is to make of all of this? Perhaps all we can say is that video game development is super hard and not an exact science. If it were, every game would be successful. Willits had previously told IGN the success of Space Marine 2 changes everything for Saber and would even positively affect its future projects. While neither Saber nor Focus have announced sales figures for Space Marine 2, Focus has confirmed over 2 million played at launch. In fact, Space Marine 2 is the most played Warhammer video game of any type ever released on Steam, with 225,690 peak concurrent players on Valve's platform. Willits won't go into hard numbers for Space Marine 2's success, either in revenue or in profit terms, but he has gone on record saying that Space Marine 2 is the fastest selling game he's ever worked on, and that includes Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein, and the Rage games id Software released over the 24 years he was at the studio. I genuinely was trying to read this article without being critical of the writer, but please, for God's sakes, when you have someone like Willis that's bringing such incredible talking points to the table, could you try to think critically or deliver something of value? Seriously, what's to make of this? Maybe game development is super hard and not an exact science? The man just told you what the problem is, and the discussion flew over your head. Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't an exception to the rule. It was a game that was developed over the course of 6 years, but they only spent $100 million. Sven Vinke, the lead behind Baldur's Gate 3, shed some light on this in an interview with GameSpot.
You need to make sure you have enough fuel to do it. Yeah. That's probably the biggest one. I mean, like, we had reserve fuel based on the success of the original Sin 2 to engage with this. We upscaled our ambitions when we saw the success in early access. Right. So we would have not done that if we would have seen that early access wasn't as successful. So yeah. I think the most important lesson for us is how important dashboarding is, so you can actually see your fuel meter, so you don't run out of money and you don't get into trouble, because it does remain the fuel that you need to make your game. If you do it at the scale that we do it, with the amount of level of permutations, the amount of immersion gameplay, you're going to run into trouble. Guaranteed. Yeah. So that means that you need to have reserves.
Larian saw the success of Divinity Original Sin 2, and they based their projections off of what it did. They were conservative. They put out an early access model of Baldur's Gate 3. They saw all the support they were getting from their fans, and then they chose to upscale based on that level of support and the financial support that they received through sales. Not only did this lead to them being more financially responsible, but it helped them hyper-focus on the things that mattered the most to players who bought the game during early access, and they stayed true to that vision, just like Space Marine 2. And they just refined those core elements of the game to be able to reflect what customers wanted. There's nothing wrong with scoping out your game, but Baldur's Gate 3 scoped out individual mechanics, not necessarily the activities. Ubisoft has forced RPG mechanics, levels, XP, randomized loot, multiple choice outcomes, and more into all of their games, diluting the experience that players are coming to their games for. Larian Studios, on the other hand, said, "We want to make choices matter in our RPG," and they fleshed out those individual narrative paths for players to play in each scenario. They didn't add a bunch of extra bells and whistles and useless crap to try to make the game look big. They made the game feel big. I feel like a lot of this just comes down to overblown budgets and too many employees. Starfield cost $200 to $400 million to make. Spider-Man 2 was $300 million to make. Diablo 4 had over 9,000 people working on it. Star Wars Outlaws likely cost $200 to $300 million and had over 600 developers working on it. None of these games reflect the money that was invested, nor the amount of people that were working on them. In fact, it's likely the reason why these games aren't meeting their financial targets. It's also the reason that these games are failing to meet audience expectations. Too many cooks in the kitchen, too many ideas, too many ideologies, too many managers to get anything approved, and too many people to get anything done within a reasonable amount of time. Black Myth Wukong cost $43 million to make and was made by 140 employees. Baldur's Gate 3 had 450 employees and a budget of $100 million. Space Marine 2 likely had 200 developers or less and cost around the same. These games didn't succeed because they had massive budgets and thousands of employees. They succeeded because they spent less to make more. They didn't hire for numbers, they hired for talent. They didn't employ employees, they employed artists. They had a clear vision for what the players wanted to make, and they delivered it. Just make it make sense to me. You made Concord, which cost you $400 million, and you made it to appeal to an audience, its identity as a product, because you made your characters a certain way, and you had a very specific image that you were going for, and you had the whole movie thing that was attached to it. That game was made for a minority of beliefs within the consumer base. This isn't about social politics or anything like that. I'm just talking raw numbers. These are not opinions or ideologies that are held by the vast majority of consumers. You say that you want to target wider audiences, casual audiences, people that don't even play video games, but the things that you're making don't even appeal to those people in the first place. So what are you doing? And why are you going to act surprised when your game releases and you sell it to the realistic amount of people that you should see for sales for a game like that? They sold 25,000 copies. That's pretty realistic for that game, in my opinion. This comes down to something that I brought up in a previous video, and I do truly believe this. I think that what ended up happening in the video game industry, and the reason why it's suffering so much right now, is that in the race to scale up, because the game industry exploded. It's now the biggest entertainment industry in the entire world. It makes more money than movies, television, and music put together. In that scale up, with all that investor money that came in, all of these companies had to show that they were growing. And the best way for them to show that they're growing, because it takes a while to make a video game, is to expand and hire more employees and start more projects, because that's what investors want to see. They want to see how you're scaling up. How are you growing and getting bigger? What are you using my money for? They want to see that reflected. And doing that, they weren't out there hiring talent. They were just hiring warm bodies. That's all that they wanted. And as a result, they hired on a ton of these talentless NPCs that 90% of their life is based on what's happening on the internet. And they think what's reflecting in the screen of this device here or on your computer monitors is what you see in real life. And it's just not true. The opinions that you see shared on the internet, the beliefs that you see shared on the internet, are not how people react in real life. And it's also not how people make decisions on what they're going to buy and what they're not going to buy. It's just not how life works. How many times have you said or seen somebody say something online and do something completely different? Because the online personality is not the real personality. Everybody knows this. The issue that they have now is that they've scaled up, they've hired on all of these people, they have too many employees, so now their projects are taking longer to make because you have too many ideas, you have too many people you have to talk to get anything approved, you have a lack of talent, which makes it even more difficult for you to be able to get projects done on time, which then ends up costing you even more money. You keep pumping that money in, the game comes out, it fails. Now you're desperate for more money, so you try to spend more to fix your issues, and you have the same problem happen again. Rinse and repeat. And that's what we've been seeing in the industry. And this is going to be the one thing that game developers are not going to want to hear me say, but it's the damn truth. There needs to be more layoffs. These companies need to downsize insanely. And while that sucks for the financial, the financial stability of the people that are working there, and while in a lot of cases the vast majority of them are not going to deserve those kind of things, you do find other work. And in a lot of cases, other studios are going to be hiring on people, or they find jobs in other... Life moves on, man. I got laid off. I've been laid off a couple times. I've lost jobs in the past. It happens to everybody. You just find a way. That's just how life is. And in the case of these companies, if they don't figure something out to turn things around, they're going to be in a lot of trouble in the next few years, especially in the next 5 or 10 years. And it makes it even more difficult because they're so big and bloated, it takes too long for them to correct their issues. Because even if you do downscale your company and you do start paying attention to the talent that you're hiring and the leadership that you're hiring, and you get a clear vision on what you want to make, well, it doesn't matter because it's still going to take you 4 to 6 years to be able to make a video game. And that's a long time not to be making money. So I don't know what the overall solution to this issue is, but I think that the Space Marine 2 developer did a really good job at bringing up why games are failing. And he's pretty spot on. A lot of these games just don't have the identity. They just aren't entertaining. They're just games that aren't made for the players. And when you're making games that aren't made for people that are playing video games, well, they're not going to buy it. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure to like, subscribe, share the video to your friends. You guys can join the Discord. Discord link is in the description of the video. Make sure that you guys come and follow me on Twitch. Catch me live. Hear me rant about video games, play video games, and things like that. Outside of that, my friends, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Family, 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 family.
Big thanks to New World Eternum for sponsoring today's video. You can start your adventure today. New World Eternum is available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Don't miss out on this incredible world. Check the link in the description and jump in today.